Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you tonight to talk to you about a topic that is really close to my heart, and that's how do we go about empowering and protecting our little ones against sexual assault? So there's two key objectives for tonight. Number one, I want you to finish up this webinar with a deep understanding of why it's so important that we proactively educate the children in our care. And number two, I want you to leave this webinar feeling confident that you now have the skills and the knowledge to be able to do so. Now, at this point in the night, I do feel like it's necessary to apologise, and that's because despite the topic of tonight being so very necessary, the reality is it is very confronting. And so, at any point, if you are feeling overwhelmed or emotionally triggered, then I really just do encourage you to practice self-care, take a break if you need to, and even leave the webinar early because all participants are going to be getting a recording of tonight's session as well as the slides. So also don't feel like you need to take notes the whole night because you will be emailed the slides tomorrow. Okay, so what are we going to be talking about? So to start with, I'm going to be just giving a little bit of background information about the events that inspired my journey into child protection. And then we'll look at the what, the who, the when, the why, and the how of protecting our kids. And then we'll have the opportunity to do some Q&A. Because we've got such a big group tonight, we've got two options. You can either email me at contact@onlyforme.com.au or put your questions in the chat throughout the night. And when it comes to the end of the evening, then I'll be answering those questions via the chat. Okay, so just a little bit about myself. My background wasn't always in child protection. It was actually in admin and marketing, but that was a very long time ago now, basically 20 years, because since that time, I've basically been a stay-at-home mum. So I'm very blessed. I have four children, two girls followed by two boys, and here's a photo of them that was taken not long after I wrote Only for Me. And then I kind of blinked and they grew up very, very quickly. And so this photo was taken a couple of months back at my daughter's 18th. So they now range in age from 20 through to 10 is the youngest. And I'll just be referring to some of my own experiences as a mother throughout the night. So tonight, I'm really just here before you as a mum who went on an unexpected journey into child protection when just over 10 years ago now, I went out for dinner. And on this night, I heard about two separate cases where young children had actually been sexually abused by children their own age. And I will tell you more about those stories in a moment. That journey culminated for me 2.5 years after that night with the release of my picture book, Only for Me, which very gently teaches your children that their body is private and that they have a right to protect that privacy. And since its release, I've become a passionate child protection advocate. I've raised over $30,000 now for child protection organisations through some of the proceeds of Only for Me. And I guess Only for Me has continued to go from strength to strength. I've now sold over 70,000 copies, which is pretty amazing for a self-published author. And it actually hit number 8 on Amazon USA a little while back, which was very cool because that was out of 33 million titles. It was only there for a temporary period of time. It was there for a couple of hours, but the important thing was I got that screenshot of it sitting there at number 8. So that was really cool. But the things that have had the most impact on me, the most profound moments during this time, have been when I've heard back from parents like yourselves. And sometimes they have attended this very seminar. Other times they might have just purchased Only for Me and they've got in touch to tell me how Only for Me has actually directly impacted their child's life. So it could be that they received a disclosure within, just recently purchasing the book and reading it with them, and the child was able to unpack what had happened to them. Other times it was like many years down the track where a parent has got in touch to say, look, this is what happened recently and this is how my child responded and this is what they did. It didn't stop that situation happening at all, but what it did stop and what it did change and impact was how that child responded. And without a doubt, those are the moments that I'm most proud of. And really, they're the moments that inspire me to keep on with this work, which can be very challenging at times. So now I want to tell you a little bit more about those stories that really inspired this journey for me. So in the first case, Mum explained to me that she'd been at a play date with her 7-year-old son, and they'd been to the park. It was during the school holidays, and while they were driving home, her young 7-year-old disclosed to her that the other 7-year-old had actually been touching him inappropriately as they played on the play equipment. So that mum obviously called up the other mum who she'd been with. They were friends, and when she told the other mum what had transpired, the other mum then revealed that they had actually discovered the young son accessing pornography on his iPad several months before. And whilst they had then put controls in place to ensure that he couldn't access the material, they weren't aware that the impact had already been done because of what he'd been exposed to. And so it was really important that this young boy knew that the behavior was inappropriate and that he needed to tell someone about it, because the flow on effect was that this other young boy got the help that he needed. In the other case, it's just coincidental, but again, it happened to take place between two young boys and again in a park setting. This time, the two families were walking home from school, as they often did together, and they stopped to play on the play equipment. And this time, the 9-year-old boy needed to go to the toilet. And because the mum had younger children to watch on the play equipment, she sent him with the other 9-year-old. I thought that was a good, safe option. The toilets were the cubicles that opened up directly onto the park with the washroom area outside. So I can understand why she thought that was really safe. And so over the boys went, and it was after a few minutes that her intuition kicked in, and she just sensed that something was wrong. And she raced over and opened the door, and horrifically, she discovered that her young son was being abused. But unfortunately, it wasn't. It wasn't nothing unfortunate about it. It was just horrific. But it wasn't by a stranger. It was by this other 9-year-old boy.
Jeez.
Now, what we know is that all children that act out in this way have been traumatized. Okay, so it's a trauma response. And in a lot of cases, that trauma is that they've actually been abused themselves, and they're simply reenacting what has been done to them as a coping mechanism. And so I think, that was very, very likely the case in this particular situation. So I got home from this night and I was just completely shocked, because I had no idea that my children were at risk of abuse by children their own age. It had never crossed my mind, nor had it ever entered my mind that my kids were at risk of abuse whilst I was essentially supervising them, like these other mums. And I guess the fact that it happened in my immediate community really brought home to me the fact that, well, if it could happen to these kids, then my kids were also at risk. And I realized at that point that I really needed to do something, because if they're at risk, then I needed to protect them in some capacity. Now, at this point, I really hadn't talked to my kids about body safety. My two girls were 7 and 9. I'd simply just told them that no one was allowed to touch their private parts, and that was it. And my son at the time was 4 years old, and I thought, no way, he's too young. I wanted to protect his innocence. And my youngest, fourth child hadn't yet been born. However, I was wrong, and I realized it at this moment. And the more I began to research the topic, the more I realized that I had a responsibility as a parent to educate my children. And I needed to do that by having really comprehensive body safety conversations with them on a regular basis. And when I was looking for a resource to help me through that process, I was very limited, and I couldn't find anything that actually unpacked the topic in the way that I wanted to. And so that's when I went on the journey with Only for Me. Of course, not having had a background in child protection, I then needed to consult with expert professionals. So Only for Me is endorsed by Act for Kids, which is one of Australia's leading child protection organisations. So I was able to liaise with them, and also conducted a lot of research. And so it's everything that I learnt that I now really want to impart to you tonight as parents and carers. Okay, so what can we do to keep our kids safe? So I just want to take a step back for the moment, because whilst we're going to be talking about body safety tonight, there's actually two other areas that we need to make sure that we do encompass when it comes to keeping our kids safe. And so I've coined it our ABCs, so it's really easy to remember. So the first element that we're going to discuss and make sure that we're covering is that awareness. Okay, so A is for awareness. So we want to be always aware of what our kids are doing and who they are spending time with. So this includes both in person and online, whether they're spending time with adults or other kids or young people. Um, and it's not just about checking up on our kids, but it's making our presence known to any potential person that might be thinking about acting inappropriately with our children and letting them know that we are engaged and active parents who are going to be really present. And so, there's that twofold purpose to that supervision. Um, just a few very basic tips when it comes to that supervision. We want to keep an open door policy. So when kids come over to play or you've got a lot of people in the house, there is no reason that children need to be behind closed doors. So always just tell them the rule is that the doors have to stay open. Really encourage them to come out into those common areas where they can be in full view. And likewise with devices, we don't want those hidden where they can, hide what they're accessing. We want to really encourage them to be or make it the rule that they have to be out in the open. Um, and I guess that whole idea of, I know in the past when I, used to have social gatherings, particularly in my home, and we'd sort of laugh and say, "Oh, well, the kids are quiet; they must be fine." They'll let us know if anything's amiss. But that's actually, a falsehood, because kids don't necessarily let us know when something's wrong, particularly when it comes to this topic. So really, just keeping up that supervision and being a really active and engaged parent. Okay, so then we move on to the B, which is, of course, for body safety. And that is what we're going to be unpacking tonight. So I won't say anything more about that at this stage. And then the third element is C, which is for controls. So the parental controls and software that we have access to that can monitor what our children sees online and who they have access to, and can help keep them safe. Now, that's a really big topic in itself. So I won't be talking any more about it tonight, but I really encourage you to go to the Australian Government's e-safety website, and the link is on this slide. So when you get the notes in that email, you'll be able to click directly onto this link to the e-safety government's website, where you can access a whole lot of information about keeping our kids safe online, including webinars that they are running. And I think the next one is in September, that's dealing with sort of this age group that we're talking about. But I really encourage you to make sure that you also educate yourself in that area, because it is part of keeping our kids safe. Now, I also want to mention that whilst we have these wonderful ways that we're going to unpack tonight to try and minimize the risks for our kids, I do want to point out that there is actually no complete foolproof way of protecting our kids. And I point that out because it's important that if you yourself have a child that has been abused or disclosed something to you, I don't want you that to for you to feel like that reflects poorly on you as a parent. Unfortunately, it's not a reflection of our parenting. We shouldn't have to have these conversations. It's a reflection on, the evil that's in this world. So I just want to release anyone from that if they are finding themselves in that situation. We can certainly minimize the risks. As I said before, it won't necessarily stop your child encountering a situation, but what it will do is change how they react in that situation and hopefully help them to identify the earlier stages of abuse, and minimize any damage that could be done. And I just want to be, completely open here and let you know that whilst those initial stories that I told you were the reason that I wrote Only for Me, after I wrote the book, one of my own children actually had an encounter at swimming lessons with another child. And so even someone who has become, a passionate child protection advocate, who had then educated their children in a really extensive way, still found themselves in that situation where their child came to them, and he told me that whilst they'd been at swimming lessons, one of the other boys had been touching him inappropriately under the water while they waited at the end of the pool for the instructor, who would then concentrate on one or two students at a time. So it was quite a lot of time spent at the end of the pool.
I'm curious.
And once again, with the details that I was given and seeing the behaviour of this boy in the way that he actually um, said goodbye to my son and really acted in a very adult-like manner, very much confirmed for me that this young boy was just simply reenacting what had been done to him, right down to the way he said goodbye to my son, which is also one of those tools that the predators will use to foster the relationship with the child, and we will talk more about that in a moment. Okay, so I think I've really answered the question already for you guys, but I am really passionate about letting parents know that it is us as the primary caregivers of our children who are ultimately responsible for having these body safety conversations. Now, it's wonderful that we can be supported by our wider community, family, friends, and educational settings, but it is really important that we are the ones starting those conversations at home. And there's two main reasons why I think that's so important. The first one is because body safety conversations open up a dialogue with our children, and it allows them to feel comfortable and confident to talk about this topic with us. And so if we're not having those conversations, then it's going to be very hard for our kids to come to us if they're ever feeling concerned or worried about anything. Number two, body safety education has a lot of grey areas, particularly with younger kids. And so we will be applying some blanket rules and learning what those blanket rules are tonight. But when we have real little ones who are still learning to be self-sufficient when it comes to hygiene and toileting, then sometimes we do need to make exceptions. And so I really believe that it is only us as the primary caregivers of our kids who have the insight and authority to make those exceptions. And again, we'll talk more about that in a moment, but that's very hard for anyone who is not a primary caregiver to make those exceptions. And so that's why it's great when we're supported, particularly in those educational settings, but we need to make sure that we are also and ideally instigating those conversations at home so that we can make any of those clarifications or exceptions for our children. So one of the first questions I often get asked is, well, how early should I have these conversations? And I mentioned before that I hadn't had started those conversations with my 4-year-old because I felt that he was too young, and I really wanted to protect his innocence in a world that I 100% still believe is completely over sexualized for our kids. And I really wanted him to and all of my children to stay little and protected for as long as possible. But I have come to learn that I'm actually doing my child a disservice if I'm waiting till they're older to have these conversations, because unfortunately, our kids are at risk from 3 years of age, or sorry, our kids are at risk from any age, from a very young age. So we need to be having these conversations from the point that they can start comprehending them. And that's normally from 3 years of age. So you as the parent and the caregiver, you'll know in terms of the development of your child when they're able to understand and comprehend these conversations. But generally, that's going to be from at least 3 years of age. The other reason why we want to make sure we start having these conversations early is because if you come from a household like I did, which was very conservative, where we didn't have body safety conversations and we had very awkward personal development chats when it came to the learning about the birds and the bees with that year 6 video, and I was given all of, I think, 30 seconds to ask questions, and then my mum very gratefully said, okay, great, no questions, and moved on. So when you've been growing up in a household like that, you don't have the skills and the knowledge to pass it on to your children. But I can guarantee you, when you start early, any of that embarrassment that gets passed on from that type of conservative household disappears because children at that young age, they're just so normal and natural when you have these. Start introducing these conversations, you will find that they'll not only, they'll be at ease, but also they put you at ease as well. So another really great reason to begin them early. And we do need to be revisiting these conversations on a regular basis. So, just like we remind our kids about stranger danger or road safety, we need to be regularly reminding our kids about body safety. And of course, we need to revisit these conversations as our child grows. So, that's why we also need to be revisiting them because the information is going to be adjusted as they grow and mature and their developmental as they change developmentally, then we want to adjust that conversation accordingly. Okay, so now we're getting into some of the really heavy stuff. We need to talk about why. And I just think when we understand why, it not only acts as a driver to have these conversations with our kids, but it also helps us with the how. Okay, because we really need to understand the topic if we want to be able to effectively empower them. So we need to be having these conversations with our kids first and foremost because childhood sexual abuse is a very real and prevalent issue. Okay. So we now know that 1 in 4 Australians experienced one or more types of contact. So that's skin to skin child sexual abuse. So we're not talking about isolated incidents here. It's a whopping 25% or 1/4 of children who are experiencing abuse. So the issue is a lot bigger than I think most people realise. And you might be sitting there going, well, Michelle, that's really horrible, but surely that doesn't apply to me because of whatever reason you're thinking of. Could be your socioeconomic status, where you live, your cultural background, your religion. The truth is that childhood sexual abuse cuts across all demographics of society. So, whilst there are groups of children where there is an overrepresentation for a variety of reasons, it still doesn't take away the risk factor for your child. Okay, so it's a really real and prevalent issue. And it's also one that is usually carried out by someone that is known to the child and trusted by the parents. Yeah. So for me, this really reframes where and how I'm going to approach the topic when I understand where and how my kids are at risk. So, of those reported cases that I researched during my time in writing only for me, I learned that only 10% of cases the child is actually abused by a stranger. So in approximately 90% of cases, the victim will know their abuser.
We can say about that 5 hands.
And in approximately half of these cases, the victim will actually be abused by a relative, which I think I knew probably more about the fact that that it was someone that was known to the child. But really shocked me was that statistic there that that in 50% of cases, of those cases, it will actually be a relative. So that could be a parent, a grandparent, a step parent, an auntie, an uncle, a cousin, a sibling, a step sibling. That's someone that's going to fit into that category. And in the remaining half, the perpetrator will be someone otherwise known to the child. So that could include a family friend, a neighbour, an acquaintance, or someone else who has access to your child, whether that be at extracurricular activities or in educational settings. There's going to be an element of trust there, and someone that obviously connects with your child.
Right. That's right.
And as already demonstrated from those stories that I mentioned before, in a significant number of cases, the child will actually be abused by another child or young person. And I think it's these statistics that are really the driving force for me about why it's so important that we have these conversations, as I mentioned before, because they really reframe our understanding of how and by whom our kids are at risk and highlight the need for these types of conversations. Now, after hearing those statistics, most of us just think, okay, I never want to let my children out of my sight again. But we know that that is not an option, okay? We can't be with our kids at every moment of every day, and nor should we. We want them to grow up into autonomous, independent adults. So I'm not endorsing helicopter parenting at all. Um, but the key is that we need to then educate them in such a way so that they can actually empowers them to protect themselves when you're not there. I mentioned this before because when children are taught to recognize the earlier stages of the grooming process, they can respond appropriately before any significant harm takes place. And finally, because predators will seek out vulnerable children and they actually have a few little questions that sometimes they might ask a child to ascertain whether or not they think that this child has been educated about body safety. So a child that has been educated becomes less vulnerable. Okay. Now we're here tonight, obviously, because we want to reduce the vulnerability for our kids, but we do not want to leave any kids vulnerable. And that's why I'm calling on each and every one of you to play your part in spreading the word about what you learned tonight with other parents and caregivers. So I'm just a lone voice, but we really need to spread the word. And my aim is that we create a movement where these types of conversations just become part and parcel of basic parenting responsibilities. And that way, we'll not only be empowering our kids, but also we'll be facilitating the education of future generations as we pass on those parenting skills. So it's not just important for your kids, but also for future generations. Okay, so I am acutely aware of how intense the topic is tonight. So I'm just going to take a really short break. Just going to give you 3 minutes just to digest what we've discussed so far. Grab a glass of water if you need to, a cup of tea, and I'll be back in 3 minutes. And we'll then be unpacking the how we go about educating our children. And once again, we will find that it's quite overwhelming. So have a little break now, and we'll get into it in 3 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, everyone. I've just had a comment from someone that they couldn't hear my voice properly. So I've just made sure everyone has been muted. They're supposed to be as you enter the meeting, but for some reason, some people weren't. So hopefully that will help. And I've also just adjusted um, my headset. So hopefully you're hearing me okay now. All right. So now we're going to look at the big picture of how we go about having body safety conversations. Okay, so within body safety conversations, again, we're going to break it down into three key elements. We need to make sure that we are teaching our children how to identify unsafe situations and inappropriate behaviours. We want to make sure that we're teaching them how to respond when it comes to those unsafe situations and behaviours. As part of their response, we really want to develop their ability to problem solve when it comes to preventing and disclosing abuse. And the third element we want to cover is helping them and teaching them how to communicate about this topic. So, in other words, we want to develop a language of safety for our children so that if they're ever concerned or worried or they need to ask for help, then they have the words to be able to speak up as well as that rapport with you. So, to start with, I'm going to just be running through some general tips on how we go about having these conversations. And then we're going to look at that really specific information that I mentioned earlier. So, the first thing we want to make sure we're doing is researching the topic so that you can be confident and calm when talking to your children. If we're not sufficiently prepared, then there's a chance that we may transfer our feelings of uncertainty or anxiety or fear onto our child. So you're all ticking that box tonight by being here. But this is something that you can really encourage friends and family to do when you hopefully embark on that call to action that I mentioned before about sharing everything you've learnt tonight with your friends and family. So making sure that they are actually educating themselves before they're delving into this topic with their child. We, of course, want to approach the topic gently. So we don't have to tell them everything all at once, okay? This can be unpacked over a number of conversations. And we also want to do it in a positive light, okay? So rather than focusing on the negative, we want to say things like, isn't it great that we can learn to keep our bodies safe? Because we don't want to scare or alarm our kids. We really just want them to see this as something else that they learn about safety. So we mentioned before about, stranger danger, road safety. This is just one of those other elements where we can focus on, isn't it wonderful that we can keep ourselves safe, keep our bodies safe? This is all mostly common sense, but you want to make sure you're using age-appropriate language that's simple and easy for them to understand. So we don't want to confuse them by using language that they won't be able to comprehend. It's more about the language that you don't use, probably, as opposed to any specific language that you must use. So you're not going to talk about predators and you're not going to talk about abuse. You're not going to talk about pornography. Instead, you're going to talk about, isn't it wonderful that we can keep ourselves safe? We're going to talk about, we don't want to see any pictures on any sort of pictures of private parts on any sort of device, but we don't, need to use the term pornography. So we're just going to keep it really as simple and basic as possible. I do recommend using a resource. I think, and in most cases, that's going to be a book. It will help facilitate the conversation, helps engage them. And of course, I would really love your support in my mission and for you to purchase a copy of Only for Me. But if once I read it to you at the end of the evening, if you feel like, well, this is actually, this style of book isn't something that my kid will respond to, then please have a look by all means and find one that, you think that they might be more engaged with. For me, what I really wanted to achieve with Only for Me was to create something that came across really gently, in a way that sort of I felt was still protecting their innocence. So that was kind of where I was coming from, when in the way that I approached Only for Me. So as I said, just definitely use a resource, but keeping in mind that resources are there just to facilitate the conversations and to guide you. So they're not there to replace it. So it's not about giving your child a book and walking away and hoping that they're going to get all the information that they need from the book. It's just there to act as that springboard. And the last bit of advice is that we need to make sure that we're speaking with each of our children individually. So it's okay if you've got multiple kids, you've got a big family, you can sit down and read the book together. But also, we want to make sure that we then have one-on-one conversations where we can adjust the conversation to their maturity and developmental stage. Okay, so I know it's not very nice to think about, but in order to disarm predators of the tricks and tools that they use during the grooming process, we really need to understand what they are, because when we understand what they are, then we can just disarm them. And we're going to do that by providing our kids with some really specific information. But to start with, we do need to acknowledge or identify what those tools are that they generally use. So I'm just going to quickly run through them. Again, I apologise, it's not nice to think about, but if we don't understand the methodology, then we're not going to be giving our kids enough information, okay? So we need to know this so that we can actually protect them. So the first thing that predators will often do, and this is in no particular order, but they will often almost always use different euphemisms for your child's private parts. So made up names, quite often food related, and this is to simply confuse your child and to manipulate their victims. So it also means that if a child does disclose something, if they're not using the correct anatomical terms, then it can actually get thrown out of court, or the charges can be dropped, and predators know that, okay? So that's one of the first things that a predator will do. Some of the other things include using pornography as a way of introducing them to the type of behavior, or normalizing that behavior to the child. They might also mask the behavior by calling it a game, or having it start off as a game. So, for instance, they might be just playing hide and seek with an object like a ball. And so, it might be being hidden all around the room, and then it might be under the couch or under the cushions. And then all of a sudden there's this gradual shift. And it's progressively then hidden under clothing, or, down someone's pants, because it is a very manipulative process. We also have predators that will reward your child. This can include lots of attention as well as compliments. So that's something to be aware of. If you feel that there is someone that is showing an excessive amount of interest in your child and really over the top with those compliments, then we need to, just make sure that everything is okay and that there's not anything inappropriate going on. If you feel that it's sort of out of the ordinary, they'll also reward children with anything physical. So it could be money, gifts, treats. There's no limit to the way that the type of reward that they might offer a child. So that is definitely one of the common tools. And the other thing that they will do is be very, very subtle in the way they approach the whole behavior. So they'll often start off with touch that isn't necessarily inappropriate, and it's just so gradually shifted that the boundaries are really hard for the boundaries are really blurred for the child. So those lines are really blurred. So it's very hard for them to sort of identify where it went from being something that was inappropriate, where it went from something being appropriate to inappropriate, because it is so gradual. So that subtlety. Predators will also justify what they're doing, and they can do that in a whole range of ways. but quite often they'll use their own gender as a way. So if they're the same sex, they can use that as a reason that to justify and why it's okay. Well, it's all right because we're both boys or we're both girls, using their age. So that's particularly with another young person who's older. So we're sort of looking in that teenage bracket. They might kind of justify the behaviour of, oh, well, it's okay because I'm a kid too, even though that there's a distinct difference in the ages. We'll also find that, that idea of being family or related in some way can be used as justification, and as well as things like their job or status in the community. So again, it's not limited, but they're the most common ways that the behaviour will be justified. Predators will also insist that the behaviour is kept a secret. And so um, that's the ultimate, for the predator, because they want the child obviously to keep quiet, and they can't have them telling anyone else. So they will insist that it is a secret. And to really seal that, they will then often bring in the idea that if the person does do anything, does disclose anything, that they will then reciprocate by somehow hurting somebody that they love. So quite often it will be, if you tell your mum or if you tell your dad, I'm gonna hurt them, or even themselves. And the other thing that they will do is get the child to feel some sort of responsibility. So, insisting, oh, well, you enjoyed it too, or you said it was okay, or at start, you were enjoying it. It was our game. And so by getting the child to feel a sense of responsibility, then that creates a real blockage for them being able to disclose. And so, and yeah, and so that they're um, very common tools that predators are going to use. Um, so I know that this feels really overwhelming right now, but the good news is that we can disarm them. Okay. And I'm going to tell you exactly how we're going to go about that. And then I'm going to show you how I've done it in Only for Me. So I know it's very overwhelming at this point, but by knowing all this information, we are then going to be actively able to protect our kids. Okay, and you'll see that as we go through these different areas of education, we'll slowly see how that box of tools dissipates until there's nothing left. All right, so number one, super important. We want to teach our children the correct anatomical terms for private parts. So if you are not doing this already, then I beg you to stop using any of those euphemisms or made up names and start using the correct terms. That includes penis, testicles, scrotum, vulva, vagina, nipples. Okay, they are just names. They are just labels like any other part of our body. Normally, that sense of embarrassment comes from our own upbringing. But when you use these terms early on, then you'll find that it's not anything to be silly about or laugh about for your child, because it's a name that you've always used. So I just want to give you an example of why it's so important. So of course I've got here that, predators will use those euphemisms to manipulate and confuse the victims. But also what I want to point out here is that how easy it would be for a child's disclosure to get lost in translation. So I'm going to give you one of those stories from my own experience. And that was when my son was born. My husband referred to his penis as an undushi. I think that's how you pronounce it. I always get it wrong. It's been so long since I've used it, but essentially it's the Lebanese, the word that his Lebanese grandparents used. And so my husband thought, well, that was a softer way of identifying his penis if he needed to, or referring to it. So I was using that word undushi, and then obviously I went on this journey, and I suddenly realized, well, what if he was at daycare and something happened to him while he was outside playing, with another child, and went in and told his teacher, you know, Karen, Lucas was trying to touch my Ndushi. That's not going to set any alarm bells off for that educator at that point. I mean, ideally, she would have the time to unpack what my son was talking about, but in all reality, that teacher could easily have, other children trying to get their attention at that point in time. Someone might be upset or hurt, so it could easily get lost in translation. Now let's look at the other option. If my son went to her and said, Karen, Lucas was trying to touch my penis, straight away, you're going to get a completely different response from the educator. Okay. So it is just so important that we get our kids to use the correct anatomical terms. And I mentioned before, it's also really important when it comes to those forensic interviews and court cases because they can actually be thrown out if those euphemisms are used because they can be seen as ambiguous and yeah, unfortunately, predators can get away with the abuse because simply because the children are not using those correct terms. So really important. Now, once one's taught our children to identify their private parts using those correct terms, we want to have them practice saying it out loud. So, use it in conversation where appropriate. And we then want to teach them that no one is allowed to see or touch their private parts. And we want them to know that it's wrong for someone else to expose their private parts or us to see or touch or feel their private parts. Okay, we want to teach our children that it's wrong for anyone to take a photo of their private parts or to show them any private parts in pictures, movies, or on any sort of device or screen. Now, I just will mention with that first point, if you perhaps feel that it's okay to let your children run around naked when they're on the beach or in public areas, I really encourage you not to do it, okay? Because the world has changed. And now that everybody has a mobile phone, this tiny little device in their hand where they can very, very subtly be recording your children, and it does happen, please, it is not worth it. If you feel that that's a integral part of childhood, keep it for home where they can run around under the sprinkler, maybe in the backyard, where you know that they are protected and that they can't be photographed. But please avoid doing it in public places, and just be really aware when it comes to things like, getting dressed after swimming lessons. I know it can be easier to just get them dressed there on the spot without having to go into the cubicles, which I know are often damp and wet. But at the very least, just hold up a towel or get one of those blanket ones that go over the top of them so that we can hide their private parts while we're changing them without having to, completely go into a cubicle. Because we not only want to protect them, obviously, from anyone that might be in our midst, but also we can use that as a time to reinforce what we're going to be teaching them. And that is, really important, because if we're teaching them one thing and then we're doing another, then that's only going to confuse them. So we need to make sure that we're not just educating them, but we're also reinforcing the behaviors. Okay, so we want to teach them that even if it feels like a game, or someone calls it a game, it's still not okay. We want to teach our children that they can say no at any point that someone's touch doesn't feel right. So it includes kissing, stroking, cuddling, snuggling, wrestling, tickling, either through clothes or direct touch. Okay, and that's really important, because if we're only teaching them that it's when someone touches what's under their underpants, then the abuse is already occurring. Whereas when we give them this authority and tell them that they're the boss of their body and they can say no at any point that someone's touch doesn't feel right, including all these ways, including whether it's, on top of their clothes, then we are going to go a long way to stopping the behavior before any real significant harm takes place. Now, it's all very well to say that they can say no at any point that someone's touch doesn't feel right, but with little ones, we actually need to unpack that further with them. And again, you'll do this over a series of conversations as they grow and mature. So I obviously don't know all the ages of your children, but you as the primary caregiver are going to be the one to be the best judge of that. But when you feel that they are ready and are able to understand and comprehend this information, you want to teach them how their body will warn them that something doesn't feel right. So, in other words, those physical signs of anxiety. We want to teach our child that these rules still apply even if someone rewards them. And we actually want to give them examples of what those rewards might look like. So lots of compliments, reinforcement and attention, gifts, treats, money, and even merit points is another way that a recent case that I heard where they were rewarded with, merit points within a school setting. So a whole variety of ways, but it's the idea of rewards that we want to disarm them of. We want our child to know that these rules apply no matter the person's gender, no matter their relationship to us, no matter their age, their job, or their status in the community. It's still not okay. And we're practical. We want to teach our child that these rules apply even if they have any special needs or are considered neurodiverse. So, unfortunately, some predators will use a child's diagnosis as means for justifying abuse. Now, if your child isn't aware that they do have those particular needs, then it can't really be used against them. But if your child is aware, then that's when we need to just let them know that even though that they're special in this way, it still does not give anyone the right to do any of these things to them. And once again, that's coming straight directly from a parent who contacted me and explained to me what her child had disclosed upon reading Only for Me and then unpacking that further. And she was told that by the perpetrator that it was because of her autism that they were allowed to act in this way. So we're going to shift that power and take that away from them. So, in terms of protecting our kids against that idea of keeping a secret, there's a couple of things we need to do. Okay. So, first up, we want to try and never keep secrets in our households. We never want to ask our child to keep a secret. But what we can do is use the term surprise for gifts or birthdays or parties. But we need to ensure that they're only ever short term. In the short term, so something that's going to be learnt by everybody in the near future. If necessary, you may find yourself in a situation where perhaps you're having another baby or someone's lost a job or you're moving home, something that your child has become aware of, but you really don't need them telling everybody about it just yet. So for those types of things, try and minimize them as much as possible, just in terms of simplicity for your child and protecting them in this area. But you can use a term like family matters or family business. So we definitely not going to say to them, okay, we need to keep this a secret. Instead, we're going to say this is family matters or family business, and only people in our family, only us here in this household are going to know about this for now. So try and only enlighten them with things that are in the short term. And the reason for that is because we do still need to empower them with what a safe secret is, because they will, of course, come across that term. We know that, pinky promises are still, something that children do, particularly in that primary school age. So we want our kids to know that if anyone does ask them to keep a secret, that it must be a safe secret. And the way we identify a safe secret is that safe secrets are never about their bodies and are not secrets forever, so only ever in the short term. Okay, so now we want to move that or shift that idea of them feeling responsible or blamed by teaching them that even if they feel like it's their fault, that they are not in trouble and that they still must tell someone that they can trust. And then we want to teach our child that even if someone threatens to hurt them or to hurt someone that they love, that they must still keep on telling. And in actual fact, it's just a big trick to keep them from getting the predator themselves from getting in trouble So shifting that power away. And you'll see there that if we can teach our children um, all of these things that we've just discussed, then we've gone a long way to disarming them of those commonly used tools and techniques. Keeping in mind there's no foolproof way of protecting our kids, but there is a great amount of information we can give them that will help minimize it. Okay, so we've just talked about all the things that we want our children to be able to identify, um, which is that first element that we talked about. We now need to look at, well, what are the ways that we teach our child to respond to inappropriate behaviour, keeping in mind that responses need to be practiced and reinforced. So the most basic response for our child to learn, and it's the one that we'll teach our little ones as the very first step, is to shout out no or stop to behaviour that's inappropriate. So it's the most basic response, and we want them to know that it should be combined with running or moving to a place or person of safety. We then want to develop that response and practice a sentence with them. And this is just an example. You can come up with your own sentence, but something along the lines of, please stop, I don't like that. And that's for when they're feeling uncomfortable. So there may not necessarily be anything inappropriate going on, but we've just given them the authority to say no if someone's touch doesn't feel like right. So perhaps someone is giving them, a rub on the back or a hug or a pat on the leg, or they've got their arm around them and they're feeling unease, then we want to give them the words to use in that situation. So that's my example. Please stop. I don't like that. It doesn't necessarily really matter what the words they are, but you need to make sure that you repeat it to your child on a regular basis and you get them to repeat it and rehearse it back to you, because what we do know is in that moment of fear, it's very hard for a child to articulate the words. But when we've actually practiced and given them that response, they're going to have that go-to in their mind. Now, another way we can teach them to respond, and again, this is something that you'll need to be the judge of in terms of when they're ready to be taught this, but we want to give them or give them permission to establish an excuse for when they're feeling physically isolated. So let's, for an example, think of being at a park with, a large number of families and a big extended picnic, and they suddenly find themselves physically isolated, perhaps behind, the toilet block, might still be out in the open, but they just know that they're not in view of everyone, or perhaps they're at somebody's house and all of a sudden they're alone in a room with somebody that's making them feel uncomfortable. We want to give our kids permission to use an excuse or a little lie to get themselves back to a place of safety. And again, it doesn't matter what that excuse is, but my example is, I think I'm going to be sick. I think I'm going to vomit. Okay, so that is the excuse that that they would give, and that they would then ensure that they're combining that with moving back to a place of or a place of safety, or to a person of safety. And again, reminding our children when we're revisiting these conversations, now tell me, what would you do if you found yourself in this situation, and get them to recall it, so that ideally, if they ever have to use that in real life, they're going to be able to easily think of what it is. And the final bit of advice is for older children. So obviously, you've got my teenagers now, and it's about creating a passphrase or a code word that you can use to let you know that they're feeling unsafe. But given that kids are often all together and with their peers, it can be hard for them to admit how they're feeling. So the word we came up with, or the phrase we came up with, my kids, is "Mum, I have a migraine." Now, thankfully, my kids don't suffer from migraines. But they know that they can use that phrase, whether it be in person or on the phone or in a text message, to let me know that they're feeling unsafe wherever they are, and I need to drop what I'm doing and go on going to get them. So just another way that we can, extend that response to them feeling unsafe or uncomfortable. Okay, so now we're going to move into the communication component. So we want to teach our children that nothing is ever so awful that they can't talk to you or someone else about it. And all body safety conversations need to be built on this knowledge. So if you haven't already established this idea with your child, then it's one of the first things that you should be doing, because it's not just important when it comes to this topic, but it can help them in all aspects of their little lives, whether it comes to bullying or their mental health, something they've done or witnessed. We want them to be able to talk about it. I thought I had plenty of charge, but I'm just going to plug my battery in, guys. Just give me 2 seconds just in case. Okay, all done. Okay, so moving on from there, we want our kids to know that they need to tell someone that they can trust if someone does any of these things or at any point that someone makes them feel uncomfortable. We also want to build a network of trust with our child. So that's 5 people that they can go to if they're ever feeling concerned or worried. So you need to try and include a variety of people. So you could have a couple of family members, but also someone in that where they spend a lot of time. So if that's in that educational setting, someone that you feel that or that they feel and you feel, because it's got to come from both of you. Because we need to guide our children when it comes to who is appropriate, that they could go to. And then perhaps, someone that could be a family friend, or a neighbour, someone that, again, that you feel comfortable with, that your child has access to. So my bit of advice when it comes to this network of trust is to make sure that you keep it up to date, because it will change, even if just at the beginning of each year, it's something that you revisit, particularly as they move into different classes, particularly if you're using someone in the educational settings. And also, if your child doesn't read yet, then just writing their name on the finger, which is what most places will get the kids to do, particularly when they're at daycare, it's not going to be very meaningful for them. And that's one of the reasons why it's great that these conversations start at home, because this is an important this task requires input from you as the primary caregiver, and it also gives you an opportunity to print out little photos of those people. So if they're not reading yet, please don't just write the names on, but print off some little photos of those people so you can make it really meaningful for them. And the final thing that we want to establish with our kids when it comes to communicating about abuse is that if the first person that they tell someone and they don't help, then they need to keep on telling until someone does. Because what we do know is that in real cases where children have disclosed and that person hasn't either believed them or taken action, then more often than not, they actually do not tell anyone else. So we really want to encourage them and educate them that if they tell someone and they don't help, they need to keep on telling until someone does. And that's why it's particularly important that we also have that network of trust and not just ourselves as the primary caregivers as being the person that they're going to go to. Okay, so that is all the information that I'm suggesting that we cover. And I know it seems really overwhelming, but I am going to read you Only for Me now and just show you how I have managed to incorporate it into Only for Me. There's a couple of spots that I will stop and just clarify a few things, but otherwise I'll just be reading it through. These are my eyes, so sparkly and bright, for seeing and blinking and closing at night. This is my mouth, very handy, you see, for eating and talking and smiling with glee. These are my hands with fingers so long, for holding and counting and clapping to song. These are my feet, as strong as can be, for walking and dancing and holding up me. This is my tummy, it's so very cool, it grumbles and rumbles and loves to be full. This is my bottom and bits that we. They're very private and only for me. They have proper names that are good to use. That way, no one gets confused. Obviously, an opportunity for you to practice with your child the correct names for the correct anatomical names for private parts, getting them to say it out loud. Sometimes it can take them quite a while to be able to get their mouths around the words. But even if they're making an attempt at it, even if it doesn't quite come out right, the more they practice it, the better they'll get at articulating it. Now, no one can touch or make me show, and if they try, I must say no. No one's to look or take a photo. The answer's still no, 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 no. Okay, this is one of the pages that I just want to stop on. And that's just to point out that when I wrote Only for Me, I made the deliberate choice to say no one. Okay. And that's simply because I am not in a position to make any exceptions or clarifications for your child. That's up to you as the primary caregiver. Okay. So I have made that blanket rule saying no one. But if your child, is confused or questioning you or challenging you about any of these concepts, then it's your responsibility to be able to make those exceptions. So my advice is, where necessary, be as specific as possible to narrow down the exception. So I'll give you an example. When my youngest Tom was still at preschool, he still needed help with his hygiene and his toileting. So I would say to him, and I know that this isn't always possible depending on how many educators you might have in a daycare setting. But we had a smaller preschool, so I was able to name the 3 teachers that might be involved in helping him. If Karen, Ann, or Therese, Karen, Ann, and Therese are allowed to use the toilet paper to make your bottom clean after you do a poo. Okay, so I minimised what the exception was. Be as specific as possible to narrow it down. Okay, so you can only work within the parameters that you have. So if you are somewhere where the educators change, well, you may not be able to name them specifically, but even just by suggesting that it's with the toilet paper, and it's in this instance, it's when you do a poo or when you go to the toilet that they're going to need help. So narrow them down as much as possible. And of course, where possible, it's always going to be in the context of consent. I know that this is one of the grey areas where it can be tricky. Obviously, when kids are too young, sometimes, we can ask to change nappies and then they can say no, and that can be problematic. And it's just one of those grey areas that you need to navigate as best as possible. So where it may not be possible to always do it in the context of consent, because of course we need to change nappies. We need to keep them clean, but as much as possible. So an example of that would be they might be questioning, oh, well, am I allowed to be in the bath with their brother or sister? I'm not allowed to see their private parts. Well, then you would make that exception, and you'd say, well, as long as it's okay with you and it's okay with Emily, then you're allowed to be in the bath together. So in that context of consent, but we'd also, in that situation, we keep an open door policy. We would ensure that any interactions in the bath are appropriate, and we will normally find that one of the most common questions I get asked is, at what point does it become inappropriate? More often than not, the older child will suddenly become a bit more self-conscious and decide that they don't want to bath together. So I'm not, I'm not here telling you not to do any of those things. I've just made that that blanket rule for ease of understanding, but it's up to you to make the clarifications. And another way we can help with that is just getting them to be as self-sufficient as as early as possible. Easier said than done, I know, with toilet training, but even washing themselves in the bath, that type of thing. So if you do have, for instance, grandparents helping with bathing, minimizing the number of people that need to help them. So get them up to speed as much as possible. And if it's only, a couple of times a week, that maybe you might be getting someone else in to help, then on those nights, what? If you say, it's okay, mum, it's okay, dad, we're just going to, let him wash his own private parts, or we're not going to, wash them closely. well, you guys are doing the bathing because, we're trying to keep those exceptions to a minimum. That's another little tip. Okay, so I'll just go back a step so we can make it flow. Now, no one can touch or make me show, and if they try, I must say no. No one's to look or take a photo. The answer's still no, 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 no. So also on this page, that's when I would stop and start talking about the different ways that they can respond as they grow and develop. And even if my clothes are there, and definitely when my body is bare, and even if they say it's a game, and even if their bottom's the same, and even if they give me treats or gifts. So I'd be subsequent readings, quizzing my child, asking them, what if they gave you this? What if they gave you that? Would it be okay? And it's not okay if they show me theirs because bottoms are private, not to be shared, not even in photos or on the TV, not on computers or in a movie. And I can say no whenever I like if someone's touch doesn't feel right. It might be a kiss or maybe a snuggle or stroking my body when having a cuddle. So these images below the text demonstrate the different ways that their body might warn them that something doesn't feel right. So it's those feelings of anxiety that we discussed before. And that's another way we can expand on that conversation, helping them to understand those feelings and what they mean. And when it comes to giving our kids that authority over their body and the ability to say no at any point, as I mentioned before, we need to be also following through with the information that we're giving our kids. So there's no point in giving them that authority and then going over to the grandparents' house where you might have, Nana or Pa insisting that they get kisses or cuddles. And obviously that can happen in, with family friends as well as other relatives. So my advice when it comes to that is to try educating the relatives, and hopefully when you give them some of the information you've learnt tonight, they will be on board when they understand how important it is to be able to give our kids that authority over their own bodies. But if they're still struggling with that, and obviously it can be cultural and it can be generational as well, let's get them to get your child to hopefully still respond, but in a less intimate way. So if they're insisting on a kiss, suggesting a cuddle. From there, it might be a handshake or a fist pump or a high five, right down to a verbal response. So in that way, at least they're still showing sort of respect for the relatives, but it's taking the intimacy away. And another great way you can do it is actually by being proactive. So as relatives arriving or leaving, saying to your child, oh, look, Nana's here. How would you like to say hello to Nana? And giving them that option, or rather than, waiting for them to have to respond to the suggestion by the relative. So, just basically taking the control of the situation yourself as the parent. And I can say no to a he or a she, a stranger, a friend, or my family. I can say no if they're cool or clever, sweet or kind. It just does not matter. So an opportunity for you to discuss the people in your child's life. Now, if someone did the wrong thing to me, it's not a secret. It just can't be. And no matter what they say to me, nothing terrible will come to be. It's that whole idea that any threats that they may experience are just a big trick to keep them quiet. And then we've got here on the page a reminder of what safe secrets are. So safe secrets are never about my body, and they're not safe secrets forever. For I'm not the one who's been bad, and keeping quiet will make me sad. So I'm not in trouble, but I must tell an adult that I can trust. Okay, so we're then going to develop that response. So here is the outline of the hand, which is commonly used to establish that network of trust. Sometimes it's referred to as their hand heroes, which is quite a cute way of thinking about it. And as I mentioned before, you want to not only write their names on there, but you also want to put those little photos on if your child cannot read yet. And we've just got that reminder there that it's the job of these people to listen to you and to help you feel safe again. And if they don't do their job, then they need to keep on telling someone, telling until someone helps. Now, this final page was added, I guess, a little bit as an afterthought because it was right before I went to go to print, and I came across an academic paper about the the books that had been written on this topic dating back to the 70s. And what it identified was that for the ones that did recommend that they tell someone that they can trust, none of them actually provided any framework for what that might look like. So to tell a child that, if they have been through this trauma of abuse or experienced something inappropriate, then that wasn't enough for them. And this needs a book in itself, and I have been asked to write it. Hopefully I will get there one day. But just as a quick way of dealing with that, I've put in this additional page. So I would definitely read these with older kids, but with little ones, I'd probably hold off unless I was, really concerned that they had been exposed to something. So it just outlines. Now, that adult's job is to help set me free from the bad things happening to me. First, they should make sure that it ends, then take me to someone to help me mend. But if that person doesn't know what they must do, it's okay. I just need to tell someone new. Okay, so that's how I've incorporated those concepts into ONI for me. So I hope that helps direct you and gives you a bit more information about how we can address all these issues, which in the first instance can seem really overwhelming. And it's really just important to remember that whilst these conversations are absolutely critical, we need to make sure that we are also fostering a relationship with our children where they do feel like we are engaged in their little lives and that we are connected to them. Because obviously the ultimate end game is that they will come and talk to us if they're ever concerned or worried, and if they don't feel like we are engaged and available to them, then that's going to be a real blockage for them. So just some basic tips. We need to try and check in every day with our kids, just sort of have it almost like a checklist. Have I checked, have I checked in with them today? Some ideas of when you can do that. Car, when you're driving around, that's great. They're strapped in, they can't run away. Definitely recommend those dinners around the table. And I can guarantee you, though, that the number one time is when you are exhausted, when you've read them bedtime stories and you're ready to go and have your cup of tea, and they are all of a sudden wanting to talk about their day. To obviously delay bedtime for as long as possible. That is a really good time to get some insight into their little lives. So just recognize, I guess, that for what it is, and definitely ask them, for some more information about what's happening. And to help that, I really recommend that you ask specific questions. So rather than just sort of saying, "Oh, how was your day today?" You ask that, you're going to, more than likely get a general response. But if you ask a question like, "What's something that made you laugh today? Did anything make you cry?" Or "What's the best thing that happened today? What was the worst thing?" Then hopefully you're going to get them to have a little think about, exactly, other things that were happening. And the other thing you can use, if your daycare centre does use any digital portfolio, then checking in, have a look at what they were actually doing that day, and then using that as a springboard for those conversations. We know that experts recommend that one-on-one time with each of our children. My sort of personal take on that, or advice, is just it doesn't need to be elaborate or expensive. And I only say that because I did have some friends who were doing these amazing mummy days and daddy days with their kids, and they were very elaborate and they were whole days. And I used to feel a bit overwhelmed that I couldn't actually compete when it came to the way that they were having that one-on-one time. But what I worked out is, what? It's not about what you're doing. It's about the fact that they have your undivided attention. And in all honesty, I think it's just as effective to be sitting down, playing with them a game that, that they want to play. So it doesn't need to be expensive. I used to do, sit down and make sure the other kids were occupied, and it could be, dress ups or Lego or out in the yard. But as long as you're having that one-on-one time with them, it does not need to be anything really elaborate. I think you're going to achieve, have the same outcome than if you do something that's more sort of involved or expensive. So just definitely don't let that be a blockage to you having that time together. And my last bit of advice comes from, again, my own personal experiences of having a daughter who was very reserved and shy. So even with me, she was coming home and from school, and I was checking in with her. And as far as could see and ascertain, she had a good day. But then I'd be getting phone calls from her best friend's mum to say that her best friend was bawling her eyes out because she'd witnessed my daughter being bullied that day. And it was only then that when I would sit down and prompt my daughter, would she then tell me, like, actually what had been happening. And it was some really horrible stuff. So I recognized that she was going to need a bit of help in terms of overcoming that. And so I created what I called the pillow book. And it was simply just a notebook where I wrote an affirming message in the front to her, and I put it under her pillow, and I told her that I left something under there with the instructions that inside the book, that if she ever needed to talk to me about something that was a bit tricky or a bit hard for her to say out loud, that she could write it in the book. And the instruction was she would then put it under my pillow. So I'd go into bed some nights and I'd find the notebook under my pillow. And of course, I could write back to her using the book, but the idea was that I would then have the information that I needed to instigate that conversation. So just an idea if you do have a child that's also, feeling or finds it hard to open up to you. If they don't read or write yet, then you can still use that idea, but make it a drawing book. And we know that's actually helps in a secondary way as well, because art is and drawing is used, in therapy now. So not only will hopefully you be able to unpack their picture with them and find out what their drawing's all about, even the very act of drawing, a picture of what happened or what they experienced can also help them through any difficulty that they need to overcome. All right, guys, so we're nearly at the end of the night now. Again, you'll have access to these links because they will be actual links on the slides. So if you want any more information about the signs and indication that a child's been abused, you can find those links on my website, but you'll also find that a lot of the information is on the Brave Hearts website, which has a wealth of information as well. So in terms of reporting abuse, we're only asked to call 000 if we are concerned for the immediate safety of a child. Otherwise, each state has their own child protection agency, and you can find their contact details on the National Office for Child Safety website, which again will be an actual link on the slides. So that's sort of where you've decided that you need to report something. If you just want some more general advice, or you're not sure if it's something that you need to be concerned or worried about, then Brave Hearts have that 1-800 number. They would be definitely the first people that I would call. However, they are only open during business hours. So if you did want to speak to someone outside of business hours, the 1-800 Respect National Counselling Service can also assist you and point you in the right direction. All right, guys. So I know it's been a big night. So we're just going to finish off with those questions that you might have. So I'll be going into the chat to answer them. In the meantime, I just want to remind you of that challenge in terms of spreading the word and sharing my mission, because obviously there's only so much I can do as one person. I do, from writing the book to publishing it to distributing it, I do it all myself. And so, I definitely encourage you all to get out there, talking to people, but also on social media, or if you're in any Facebook groups, whether it be for work or parenting, sport, doesn't matter what the group is, where it might be appropriate to, raise the question and ask, have you guys had these types of conversations, with your kids, and let them know just how important it is. And finally, if anyone did want to purchase a copy of Only for Me, it's available on my website for $14.95. So you can go to onlyforme.com.au or also due4books.com.au. It will take you to the same homepage. You can purchase it from other places, but when you have purchased it from Only for Me from my website, that's where I do donate the author royalties. So if at all possible, I'd love you to purchase directly from the website because that's where it will be most beneficial. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for listening. The final thing that I'm just going to put up there is that number for Lifeline, because of course, with the statistics that we talked about tonight, 25%, there will be people tonight that have had to endure this, hearing about what I've had to unpack, where they've had their own experiences. So if it has been triggering for you, please know that Lifeline is available to talk to you tonight if you do need to reach out to somebody.